welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 11-16 meta for each stage of the game. We'll be covering each aspect of the meta, including stages, items, and compositions. This patch has had a lot of interesting evolutions to it, especially after the B patch that nerfed Tristana. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Before we start breaking down the stages of the game, let's first take a quick look at the overall meta for 11-16. At the beginning of 11-16, it looked almost identical to the last week of the 11-15 B patch, as the same compositions were still doing well, with the exception of Lucian. The nerfs to Lucian essentially dropped him right out of the meta entirely. Sentinel openers were still doing well, Abomination still had a stranglehold over the mid game, and the late game was all about Heimerdinger. But the composition that defined the first half of 11-16 was Tristana reroll. Despite being nerfed, this composition dominated the latter. This was mainly due to the way the composition functioned with positioning. Backlining everything meant the enemy team had to move forward, paving the way for Tristana to jump behind the carry and snipe him. Mixed with that was the overall strength of Kennen and Lulu. Plus, whenever a 2-cost champion is overtly strong, it means the meta revolves around who's playing that champion, since multiple players can easily hit Tristana 3. In any given lobby, it wasn't unlikely to see 2 Tristana players that hit, and maybe a few others that attempted to. And so, the meta was all about Tristana until the B patch that nerfed her and Lulu. The composition didn't completely disappear, but it was no longer the dominant build. Now, the real meta of 11-16 was able to show its face, which mainly revolved around 3-cost champions. There's plenty of great 4-cost champions, but the ones that can carry are, well, a bit limited in the current meta. As such, that means a lot of the mid-game revolves around finding and playing 3-cost item holders. Either you continue to use those champions in the late game by 3-starring them, or you try to transition into a better late-game board with 5-cost units. Overall, the pace of the game is slower now with Tristana out of the picture, but the majority of the meta still revolves around the end of Stage 3 and early Stage 4. That's where the bulk of players put together their compositions, so those that hit are able to scale into the late game, and those that don't end up in the bottom 4. We'll explore the meta compositions later on, but for now, let's talk about the early game by going over component priority on the open carousel. Honestly, items are in a great spot thanks to the introduction of the Radiant mechanic. Players aren't pressured anymore to find the exact items they need because a lot of the time, the Radiant item they get is going to help shore up any issues the composition has. That said, there's still a priority when it comes to components, but it's less rigid than in the past and more about playstyle. The first thing to consider is what playstyle do you favor as a player? Do you lean into AD boards, AP, or flex? If you're an AD player, then components like sword, glove, and bow are fantastic. Sword is the catch-all component for AD items like Deathblade, Infinity Edge, and Bloodthirster. Glove builds into the most important AD item, Last Whisper. Besides that, it can be used for AP with a jeweled gauntlet, or you can use it to make one of the best flex items, Hand of Justice. Bow covers the second component necessary for Last Whisper, but is also used to build runins. RFC is also quite useful on a lot of melee carries like Yasuo, and Rageblade is a required item for Aphelios. As for AP comps, by far the best is Tyr. Tyr can be used for Archangel, Shojin, and Hand of Justice, all 3 of which are top items for AP carries. Blue buff unfortunately doesn't have much of a place in the current meta, especially with Karma still being bottom tier. Rod is the secondary component of choice for AP, but you can get by without taking it early, as Rod is rarely that contested later on. For flex play, and in general, defensive components are fantastic. Belt builds into Warmogs or Sunfire, and Chain Vest is used for Bramble, Sunfire, Titans, and even Stoneplate. Overall, these are the types of items you want to slam early game because they're always useful for the front line and add a lot of power to your board. The only component you want to avoid, as usual, is Cloak. Cloak isn't bad, but it does have limited uses when you have multiple of it, so try to avoid it if you can. All in all, the component and item meta is quite diverse. With that, we can move into Stage 1. Not a lot has changed in Stage 1, just look for pairs and strong opening boards. Sentinel Skirmisher is still one of the best, though it did get a bit weaker. Tristana is still playable early game with Hellions, just don't get stuck on keeping her for too long. Dawnbringer openers are one of the best thanks to Gragas, Kha'Zix, and 3-cost champions. 3-cost champions in general are a great way to play the early game. Riven, Nidalee, Lee Sin, Yasuo, and Nunu are all able to carry you through Stage 2. Ashe and Zyra are weaker options, but do open the door for early Draconic, which is still playable if you hit it early enough. Now on to stage 2, where you want to be leveling at standard times. This means it leveling to 4x2-2 and 5x2-5. There's 2 reasons, with the obvious one being to save health. Saving health is the most important goal in the early game, and leveling is the easiest way to add power to your board. The other reason for leveling is increasing your odds at finding 3-cost champions. As we mentioned earlier, these champions are the key to the current meta, so finding them early, especially if you can 2-star them, is one of the strongest ways that you can play stage 2 and 3. As for loss streaks, well, it's certainly doable, but we recommend not doing it intentionally. There's fewer low-cost reroll compositions to make use of the increased gold, and saving health is overall more important. That said, if you're comfortable with this playstyle, go for it. Overall, not much has changed in stage 2, just keep to the standard leveling times and try to play your strongest board. Slamming early items is another way to get stronger, so don't sit on your components for too long. Let's move into the mid-game as we enter stage 3. First off, level to 6 on 3-2. This can be done a bit later if you're not on a win streak and have high health, or you can level earlier on 3-1 if you are win streaking and want to preserve it. Whichever timing you take, the standard is always 3-2. After leveling, you can roll if you want. It's really not uncommon to do so with how strong 3 costs are. If you do level, make sure you have a solid idea of what to find as you're trying to be as efficient as possible. Riven, Nidalee, and Yasuo are the most common to roll for at this stage, as they can be used as carries going into stage 4. Grab champions that match their traits, and find a few frontline champions, and then stop rolling. A few common stage 3 boards you may see are 6 Skirmisher with Nidalee carry, 4 Dawnbringer with Riven, 4 Nightbringer with Lee Sin, and as always, Abomination is playable. There's plenty of other boards, but those are some of the most common ones players roll for at level 6. The last part of stage 3 to talk about is radiant items on 3-6. There's no specific meta in regards to this, as each player gets 5 random items to choose from. The best option is usually whatever fills a weakness in your comp. Try to grab the item that helps your carry, either for more damage or utility. If you're already good on carry items, consider either something for your frontline or utility. Radiant Banshees and Radiant Shroud are 2 of the best utility Radiant items, so those 2 are our recommendation if you're not sure what to pick. Overall though, the choice is usually pretty obvious for what item to take on 3-6. Let's now move on to stage 4, where practically everyone in the lobby will be leveling to 7. After leveling, you will likely need to roll. Either find a new carry or upgrade your existing one, keeping in mind that a lot of the 4-cost carries aren't doing all that well. That said, there are plenty of strong 4-cost champions like Rel, Ivern, Fiddlesticks, Galio, and Diana. Try to find a composition that fits your items if you're playing flex, or continue to try to force whichever build you had in mind going into stage 4. Overall, the goal for stage 4 is to stabilize as quickly as you can with an upgraded carry and frontline. From there, you want to save gold, as leveling to 8 is the next important interval. Before we talk about the late game, let's first go over a few of the meta comps that you will see in stage 4 and beyond. First off, Tristana is still playable, but nowhere near as strong as it once was, so only play this comp if you're naturally finding a lot of Tristanas in stage 3. There are other low-cost reroll compositions such as Callista and Gragas, but for the most part, these low-cost reroll builds aren't consistent and require a lot of high rolling to play effectively. Most of the meta, as we've mentioned multiple times, revolves around 3-cost champions. Nidalee is the weakest of the carries the later the game goes on, so generally use her as an item holder for Jax or Aphelios. Riven can either be an item holder or used as a main carry by 3-starring her. Most commonly, you will see her played alongside Dawnbringer, but she can also be used with Abomination. Yasuo is the other most common late game 3-cost carry, with 6 Nightbringers backing him up. To play him, you do need more specific items such as RFC, but the overall goal is to 3-star him. Yasuo works best in a lobby with a hard-to-kill frontline like Ironclad, since his true damage ignores the defenses. Nocturne is another 3-cost carry and is played with 4 Assassin, 4 Revenant. This is not a composition we recommend running prior to finding Nocturne 2 and 4 Assassin. Once you do, the plan is simple. Add in Revenants and look to hit Nocturne 3. The end goal for the comp is ideally 6 Assassin, but that does require finding an Emblem and Viego, which isn't always possible. Abomination is the other most common composition in the meta. The carry varies, as it can be any of Zyra, Vel'Koz, or Heimerdinger. Generally, the plan is to play one of Zyra or Vel'Koz and then swap to Heimerdinger later on when you can 2-star him. But it's fine to also stick with Zyra 3 carry or even just Vel'Koz 2. When it comes to 4-cost boards, the best is Jax, as he's the most consistent. While 6 Skirmisher is playable, it's actually more common to see Jax paired with defensive traits like Knights, Ironclad, and Mystic. This keeps him alive a lot longer, and he still gets to ramp up with 3 Skirmishers. Aphelios is the second most common 4-cost carry, but needs to be level 2, have perfect items, and an Akshan to properly carry into the late game. As such, it's more common to see Aphelios as the secondary carry to Akshan. Akshan 2 is one of the best late game champions and is often the end goal of a lot of AD boards. Those are the most common meta compositions, but there's still plenty of others that are playable. Now we can move into our last section, the late game. Be sure to level to 8 sometime between 4.5 and 5.3. The time varies depending on how strong you are after stabilizing in stage 4. The late game comes down to 2 things, finding 5-cost champions and positioning. Most boards won't be hitting level 9, so staying on 8 to upgrade 5-cost champions is the most common. Volibear is one of the best 5-cost to add into any board thanks to Revenants being the best frontline trait. Gwen fits in snugly as a Mystic, and Viego is a must-have for any board utilizing either Forgotten or another Assassin. Heimerdinger is still the king of the late game, and Teemo is playable as a secondary carry, though only for players with health to utilize him. Akshan is the AD equivalent to Heimerdinger, so always look to add him in if possible when running an AD board. And then there's scouting and positioning. Diligently scouting and repositioning is the best and most consistent way to do well in the late game. It takes practice since every lobby is different, but getting better at the essential skill is the easiest way to elevate your gameplay and place in the top 4 consistently. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. All in all, the meta is still in a great spot with plenty of diverse compositions and playable champions to choose from. The only concern is that 4-cost carries tend to be on the weak side, so hopefully they address that in the upcoming patch. Let us know in the comment section below what you're looking the most forward to playing in patch 11.17. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.